Pence is the highest-ranking Trump world official to be subpoenaed in the January 6th probe. And right now, we look at the evidence. We look at where this is headed in our special report for you. We start with one reason this looms large. Mike Pence is not just another witness. He's not just a high-ranking official in the attempted coup conspiracy. This is very important. We touched on it only a little bit last night in the breaking coverage. In our special report, we get into it for you right now. The coup plotters viewed Pence as their desired MVP, their needed collaborator, their attempted co-conspirator.
The remedy was for Vice President Pence, as the quarterback in the Green Bay sweep, to remand those votes back to the 6 battleground states.
The vice president's got a lot of power, and that's very important to recognize.
Are we to assume that this is going to be a climactic battle that's going to take place this week about the very question of the constitutionality of the Electoral Count Act of 1877?
Well, I think a lot of that depends on the courage and the spine of the individuals involved.
Vice President Mike Pence?
Yes.
I don't want to.
If Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. This is from the #1, or certainly one of the top constitutional lawyers in our country. He has the absolute right to do it.
And those were fateful words. That was, of course, on January 6th. That bloodless part of the coup plot was, in their minds, supposed to culminate in then Vice President Pence thwarting that certification and setting off a series of events to help steal the election. But Pence refused to do that or break the law that day for Trump. The January 6th committee viewed Trump's efforts as criminal, and they sometimes relied on Pence aides for key evidence, including how, at the time, it was Pence lawyers who were firmly of the view that Pence didn't have an authority to steal the election. Now, for his part, Mike Pence has played many different roles in this whole series of events. He quietly and seemingly held an open mind when he heard out all these coup pitches. Indeed, before things escalated, you got the sense that he was kind of negotiating with some way to give them a little bit of what they might want. Then Pence very famously publicly resisted the plot on the 6th. Then he apparently stood strong, huddling beneath the Capitol for safety. Then later he penned a book and shared some details about that harrowing day and his role. The interviews there, they may reflect Pence's honest recollections. They may have some selective emphasis with an eye on his future in the Republican Party. But they also do something to strengthen this process under the special counsel's new subpoena, news that just broke here in the last 24 hours, because they show Pence remembers a lot of the details. Now he can be pressed on them under oath, on any Trump criminal plotting in advance, on Trump's perhaps still secret statements that were made perhaps only to Pence, or Trump's apparent intent leading up to that day, and the meetings and contacts that both Trump and other coup plotters, like John Eastman, seen here searched by the FBI, what they might have said privately that's still unknown. We do know about a dozen lawmakers met with Trump who were backing ways to overthrow the election. At least one meeting occurred on December 21st, and an attendee recently described that huddle as friendly with Pence's involvement, telling me that Pence, in his view, was encouraging debate.
It was a very friendly meeting. Vice President Pence was there. Vice President Pence, in fact, encouraged the debate. He said the debate was something that needed to happen, and he laid out his plans to entertain that. Unfortunately, violence and riots really obstructed the work that we wanted to do.
The violence got in the way. That's the same line or kind of argument used by Trump aide Peter Navarro, who now awaits trial for defying one of the other probes. The argument was that these plotters, had a peaceful plan to still steal the election, to still undermine the Constitution and democracy, but that it didn't involve violence, and then the attack interfered with their bloodless coup plan. Well, the special counsel can probe that claim and look at what Pence says about what he told the people on your screen and others, of what was covered in the meetings. What will Pence say about who was pushing him to be a co-conspirator? Is there any link between what Pence faced and observed, and why, and this matters, at least 6 of the people at the meeting that we know about, seen on your screen, later, according to multiple Republican witnesses, tried to get themselves pardons? That's an unusual and a damning development. It suggests that they thought they might be charged for something at that meeting or elsewhere. And we could also learn what kind of frame of mind they had compared to Pence's stance on January 6th, when the footage showed him literally having to go on the move to avoid the Trump fans who were nearby chanting about trying to kill him, to hang him, to assassinate him. There were agents on his detail there who we later know only because of the investigation were making goodbye calls to their family because they feared the worst, because they thought they were in situations where they wouldn't have a clear exit and they would have a lethal exchange. And I can tell you, from my time being around Secret Service agents and my experience observing them, they're not really the melodramatic types. They don't really place a lot of goodbye, I might die today calls, but they did that day. The Justice Department, with this new subpoena, can also ask Mr. Pence why he told his own agent, I'm not getting in the car, I trust you, but you're not driving the car. If I get in that vehicle, you guys are taking off. I'm not getting in the car. Wow. Under oath, Pence would have to answer pointed questions about what he meant by that and what led him to that view. Those are the agents that are supposed to risk their lives for you. And he clearly said he trusted some, but not all. So was that just out of his mind made up? It'd be hard to claim that under oath. Might be more likely that someone as careful as Mr. Pence was basing that on evidence, on information that the special counsel has a right to gather about whether, led by Donald Trump, people with guns paid by your tax dollars had scared Mike Pence to the point that he would not go with them on that day while he was in danger. It's about as serious as a heart attack. They are going to sit Mike Pence down and they're going to ask a lot of questions, and one of them will certainly involve the fact that he has already publicly indicated he was worried it was an inside job. Now, the other thing that's different tonight is the special counsel can get the job done. He has the legal authority to force Pence to testify. That's something that, for a range of reasons, would have proved harder and a longer process for the January 6th committee, which now ceases to exist. They did work with Pence's team, but they did not go full court press on him when he had publicly argued that if he did sit down and testify to Congress, it would be a bad precedent. So here we are. We know why they're eyeing Pence. I just showed you some of the reasons. And we know he's likely to testify. We don't know what else he will say that might be secret or unknown, even to the DOJ investigators. It's unknown. We don't know if Pence has hard evidence that could turn this case. For example, hypothetically, it could be good for Trump if Pence testified under oath that, say, Donald Trump privately told him, don't break any laws, or, hey, this is kind of theater and it's going to end soon, we're wrapping up here. That kind of contemporaneous testimony, if credible, could reduce the criminal intent you'd have to prove if you were trying to charge Donald Trump. Or it would be bad for Trump if Pence testified that Trump talked about backing the violence in advance or evinced knowledge of plans to storm the Capitol. That would be damning testimony, and it would go along with the public evidence that is real, we've heard, that is real, hard evidence that Trump wanted his approach to the Capitol that day to be a surprise move. But we don't know what Pence might say. And finally, for our special report here, before I bring in our experts, there is something else that many legal experts say is very likely known. That this move right now is the mark of a criminal probe finishing up.
Pence has really critical information.
This is pretty much the last step before you approach Trump.
Jack Smith wants Pence in an interview room to get more deeply into what the president said to him.
First and foremost, the one-on-one conversations on the phone and one in the wing of the Oval Office.
There is absolutely no way the special counsel can decide whether to indict or not to indict Donald Trump until he first puts Vice President Pence under oath.
And that's what he's doing. So the timeline's clear. You move your way up. Pence is the second highest ranking person here, of course, just right under the actual former president. Pence's aides and other Trump officials have already testified before this related grand jury. So Jack Smith is moving up near the top of the line. He's showing he'll turn over every stone. He has no apparent dilemma about using the power of the law to compel this former vice president to talk. He's legally demanding a former VP come in and testify under oath about the former president and the investigation of an insurrection. So that is rare and lawful. And the special counsel is using his power to do it, with the apparent support under the rules of the Attorney General of the United States. So, what comes after you get near the end? The end. It's not a trick question. The special counsel can get what is likely some of the last and most pivotal testimony here from Pence, and then wind this down. And he could do that without charging anyone and say he gathered all the facts. Or he could charge the apparent co-conspirators who tried and failed to get Pence on board, some of those aides and lawyers who clearly, according to evidence, acted to impede the certification, to steal the election, to push fraud. Or, how does it end? The special counsel could go all the way up the line, past number 2, and charge the former president himself, and expand on the evidence from Congress and the public and whatever Pence says, that Donald Trump summoned the attackers to Washington. That's the only reason they were there on the 6th. There aren't usually crowds like that. That Trump learned they were armed and sent them onto the Capitol knowing they were armed. And that Trump attempted to join them at the Capitol himself and physically clashed with people in his effort to do that. And that Trump supported the fraud and lies to overturn the election before, during, and after the insurrection, complete with public vows to pardon convicted seditionists after the fact in our midst in America. If that all sounds like bad stuff, I'm just referring to public evidence. It's not an opinion about Donald Trump. It's just literally all the stuff we know from public materials. Now, any such case would involve Mike Pence's eyewitness testimony.